Drafting in the Underdog Resurrection draft again. That's what we're talking about today on Stealing Bananas. I'm Ben Gretch from my newsletter, bengretch.substack.com. With me, as always, is Shawn Siegele. You can find all of his great work at RotoViz. And you are not listening to the same episode you have already heard. We decided to do drafts twice this week. We're drafting for the 107. Draft's already underway. It started Cooper Kupp, Justin Jefferson, Josh Allen. Thought it was a really fun way to talk through where we are at on a lot of players. The draft format kind of forced us to be a little quicker than we are sometimes with our discussions. So we said, hey, what the hell? We'll do it twice in the same week. Shawn, good to have you back. And we are 2 picks away. And no running backs off the board yet. And no Mark Andrews off the board yet, who we both agreed in the last episode probably should be a top 5 pick. Might have a fun one here at 107.
Yeah, we should have some good options now with Barkley and Andrews, as long as they don't go in the next 2 picks. As you mentioned, even if you end up listening to the show after the contest closes, it really is the best way and the most fun way and the most pressure-packed way to see what we really do think rest of season. And for that reason, and because it's fun for us, we're going to do a draft. And both Barkley and Andrews make it to our pick here.
I think it's Andrews.
I think it's Andrews.
You think it's Barkley? All right, we can go Barkley.
They're very close for me. Barkley is a fun selection. He did go at the 102 earlier. I have moved him ahead of Christian McCaffrey in the updated Dynasty running back ranking. So I actually have a new overall RB1. Jonathan Taylor is no longer the overall RB1. Saquon Barkley moves ahead of Christian McCaffrey. A couple of fun moves there. But Ben, we also got big moves.
Is Barkley the 3?
Barkley is the 3.
Interesting. All right. I like that.
So he was the guy that we selected a lot. That was one of the picks that has worked out well for us so far. We're hoping to have a good mix of Barkley teams. We need DeAndre Swift to get back. We need Breece Hall to keep things up. Then I was looking for our Ken Walker teams and realized that some of those do have some other issues. And so we're going to need Walker to score a lot of points going forward with those. He was part of our draft the first time through. A couple of things here. You mentioned the people have reached out to you asking about the price of quarterbacks through the first 5 weeks. We have this almost insane situation here where Josh Allen averaging almost 33 points a game, Jalen Hurts 28.5, Lamar Jackson 28, Patrick Mahomes 27.4, and then you have that big drop to Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert in the 22 range. Some names you wouldn't expect to stay there with him in Geno Smith, Carson Wentz, Jared Goff. Wentz probably not even going to keep the starting job long term. Then you have someone else in Joe Flacco who no longer is starting. Tua is injured. I mean, it's a pretty steep drop to the second tier, but then as you get beyond the second tier into the third tier, you've got guys who maybe not even be NFL starters. At the same time, we've had stretches before where players like Lamar Jackson and Kyler Murray were at this 30-point per game range for a stretch. Obviously, they don't maintain that and they get hurt. Josh Allen does seem like he could be something different, though. So we can talk about that a little bit as we go through the show. Obviously, we're going to have to figure out our picks. We're one selection away here, and Patrick Mahomes is still available. I think for me, there are other directions I would prefer to go.
Yeah, I don't mind. I don't mind. I don't think I agree that the quarterbacks should all be first round picks right now. I do think that gap is going to close a little bit. I think the tight end gap is bigger, and that was where my Andrews excitement was. But we are back up. Top guy by ADP is Devontae Adams. Then we have Mahomes, Tyreek Hill, Deebo Samuel. A lot of running backs so far. Jamar Chase almost made it to us in the second. We took him at the 1-2 turn last time. We're at the 206. I'm comfortable in any direction. It feels like, Adams might get suspended for a game, but
Lamb or Hall here?
All right, let's do Hall. I know you like to go pretty running back heavy in the 0.5 PPR format. We know a lot about these running backs at this point. Barkley Hall's a really nice start. If you have those running backs on a roster and you're looking at your team going forward, that's the type of team that we would like to draft in the first 2 rounds. And structurally, in terms of a best ball format, we do think there's going to be a lot of opportunities at wide receiver. There's a lot of variance at that position. There already has been, and there are a lot of players that are now undervalued at the wide receiver position relative to what they actually are. So I think it makes a lot of sense to lock in the two backs. You were talking a little bit about the quarterbacks, though. I mean, were you sort of trying to make the case that gap's going to close a little bit?
I think that it will. It's just so hard to sustain. But I also think that when you're looking at, and we did the haves and haves not show last week, I did throw in there, added on some other things that kind of worked in the other direction, but the burn it all down title. And I think if you're looking at your fantasy teams and are not getting a lot of points from the quarterback position, or your quarterbacks are limiting the wide receivers you were excited about, you kind of do want to burn it all down. And when you watch the Bills play, it's with this extreme sense of envy. And so when we think about the things that tend to bring quarterbacks together, the Bills really thwart those elements by having a quarterback who runs, who attacks deep, and a team that doesn't really care to use their running backs in any situation. I mean, Josh Allen, unless he gets hurt, is going to have a big gap. Is the gap going to be as big as it's been so far? I mean, probably not. It really, for me, is Josh Allen, then another tier. And I mean, if you wanted to get Lamar Jackson's points, then what you should do now would be to draft Kyler Murray. If you wanted to go with these star quarterbacks and benefit from them in 2022, you needed to draft them in preseason drafts, not chase those points now.
Right. And maybe the to correct something I said, maybe the way to say it is not that gap is going to close. It's just that going forward, which is what we're drafting now, that gap won't expand. I mean, it theoretically could, but I don't think it's going to be a thing where these guys continue to be so much more valuable than everyone else. They already have been. They probably will finish out ahead of everyone else because they are really good. But in terms of if you're drafting right now, taking them in the first round, because you're expecting them to expand that gap and be that much better than every other quarterback the rest of the way. What's happened so far through 5 weeks with the gap at quarterback scoring is a little bit rare. I do think you make good points that Josh Allen could be the one guy to really continue to be a superstar. Tight end is different. We were expecting a gap, and I do think it's going to continue to widen. We're back up in the third. Justin Herbert sitting there is kind of interesting, and you threw him in the queue. I liked your comment on Kyler. He's the one that stands out so obviously with the weapons returning. I kind of would be fine punting the QBs a little bit more if you want to, and going with a receiver here.
Is Lamb the pretty clear-cut choice?
Yeah, I like going Lamb here. He's been actually very, very good since the concerns after week one. Losing Dak.
I was very upset after that week one, and he's bounced back nicely. I wouldn't say that he's justified exactly a pick at the 1-2 turn, but very much in that range. The Adams Lamb teams that I have are actually some of the best teams right now. They've been fun. I'm excited for them going forward. Lamb was the other player I thought was a very realistic pick in the second round. In the middle of the third, it seems like a steal.
He's earning targets on 32% of routes, which is a massive number. Anytime you get up over 30%, it's a really, really big number. And didn't even start the season particularly well. I mean, he had a pretty good volume game in week one, but has really been earning volume these last few weeks. He was at 24% of routes in week one. In all 4 games since, where Dak has not been in, he's got at least 28% every week. Last week, he had 42% of their targets. They didn't throw a whole lot of passes. 42% of his routes he earned a target on. I think he had 50% of the targets. I think they only threw 16 passes. He got 8 of them. He's been the clear number one. I don't think, Dak coming back is going to be bad for that. I think it's going to be good, right? And he's still been pretty efficient with the volume he's been getting. So that's a step forward we wanted to see with him, was the ability to earn volume in a full route role. This was the whole thesis for him coming in. He's going to run full routes now. Can he earn volume on a per route basis that's better than last year? He's done all of that so far. And if they start to throw a little bit more, I mean, you look at Dalton Schultz, certainly injuries have been a big element for him. He comes back this past week and then hurts his knee again. Just has not been able to get going. Michael Gallup didn't look great in his first outing. Lamb has looked like the player he was billed to be from an upside perspective in basically every game since week one, right? I mean, starting right away in week 2, the efficiency got better. The volume was still there. No massive games yet, but consistently very good in a situation where he's playing with a backup quarterback. like you said, he hasn't really made good on his ADP, but in terms of the context that he's been playing with the backup quarterback, he's been very good.
He has. And that ability to draw targets is what we wanted to see from him after some of the hiccups early. He's caught the ball better. He looks like a potential star. That's what you need to see to draft him in that range. The offense could be limiting going forward, but those things are going to balance out to an extent. Now, we get here in the round 4, Mike Williams, Gabe Davis still available. Kyler Murray, interestingly, still available, would be a fun pick. I think that after Marquis Brown, and he's the 4th person still available, there's a huge tier break after that. Excited to get one of these guys. Who do you like?
I'll take any of them. I think I might lean Davis for the offense and in best ball, because I do think what we saw this week was more encouraging than discouraging. There's some people that point out he only got the 6 targets and the targets haven't been there. And there's a lot of people that talk about his target share. I mean, he hasn't been healthy. He's been running on a bum ankle. He's been earning targets at a really low rate per route, but he's been hurt. And he's only played 4 games. His sample's even smaller than a lot of other players who've played 5 now. I mean, I think he's at like 11% targets per run, very low. I don't think he just forgot how to earn targets. I think a lot of that is how defenses have been playing the Bills as well. And they've been very effective moving the ball, having to check down underneath and use their underneath weapons. They've been having answers for that. It opened up the downfield passing this past week. Maybe he's not going to be a huge target earner, but all of those targets are very high value. I mean, even one of the catches he didn't have, and it was an interception, was targeting him down the field into the end zone this past week. Ends up with only, I think, 3 catches, the 2 long touchdowns, has a monster game. But, I mean, he could have had a 3rd touchdown on the play that was intercepted, another shot to the end zone. He gets those opportunities. So, in best ball and in this offense, still a guy that I really like in the 4th round. Marquis Brown, who was the other one that were there? They were both good options, too.
And it's interesting to watch DeAndre Hopkins go ahead of Marquis Brown since Brown has played so well. And Hopkins didn't really have the profile that you're looking for before he started to run into those issues last season. He's going to have to come back and jump into an offense that is in motion. Now, is he going to come back and play well? I think that he will, but it's interesting to see someone like Marquis Brown go at a little bit of a discount. You talk about Gabe Davis not drawing targets. That's one of those things you expect to take a jump when someone is playing that well. It's not quite to the level of him being their T. Higgins, but I mean, you could see him emerging as a T. Higgins in an offense that actually could throw the ball deep much more effectively. If you had to only pick one player to lead the NFL in receiving touchdowns the rest of the way, and you couldn't pick Cooper Kupp, I mean, Justin Jefferson would be your obvious bet, but I mean, you'd have to seriously consider Gabe Davis. Kyler Murray finally does go. Ken Walker, the player we targeted last draft, goes. Chris Olave here, he's interesting. Deontay Johnson is interesting. We do have that next layer of quarterbacks in Joe Burrow, but I think that we can probably wait with that. Olave has looked unbelievable. He does get the concussion in last week's game. Do you have either of these guys or someone else as the pick?
I'm fine taking Olave. He's a guy that we did not take much, if at all, and maybe should have taken more of it and missed out on a little bit. So to get a little bit of in-season exposure to him is fun. He's been fantastic as part of the whole group of rookie receivers that have all looked better than advertised. Obviously, London and Garrett Wilson looked better maybe a couple weeks ago than they do right now. They've come back down a little bit. London goes right after Olave. So we took Olave over Drake London. I think what you're thinking, and correct me if I'm wrong, but when we're talking about best ball format, we're talking about spike weeks, Olave's air yards profile, and the volume he's been seeing relative to this. London's the upside scenario for London is continuing to just dominate the volume in a low volume passing game. It's a consistent profile, but maybe not the best one for huge spike games that we're looking for in best ball.
I think that if you're going to play the Falcons offense at this point, it almost has to go back through Pitts again, make that bet, especially with London a little bit dinged up. I mean, that offense has just been, again, the burn it all down catastrophe offense. Pretty apocalyptic there. That part has been extremely disappointing. I think Deontay Johnson is a fun play. I think George Pickens is a fun play. You mentioned
I would have went Johnson over Olave. We were a little bit low on time. I was surprised to see him with an ADP lower than Olave's, and Olave was the top pick by ADP. I think it's fine to take that. But Deontay has been, I mean, relative to the opportunities continued to earn, has been pretty much underperforming it. And we talked in the last show about why we think the Steelers passing game might actually be in a position to take a step forward right now. And I mean, I just can't imagine he continues to catch 56% of his passes like he is right now. Has no touchdowns. Has had so many near misses on the sidelines
and has looked like somebody who could actually emerge as a pass catcher. I mean, you talk about all of those near misses. To have him under 0.5 for the racer is crazy. That obviously eliminates his yard after the catch ability as well when he's not just making the catches. To have him down there with only 30 yards, the air yards actually jumping up. He's dominating targets even with Pickens in the mix. Now, it has shifted a little bit in the last couple of weeks, so it's just one of the reasons why we took Pickens in the previous draft. He goes right here, one pick ahead of us.
Dobbins, Pitts, Deontay, Pickens all go 4 picks ahead of us. All guys we would have probably been in on. You have Garrett Wilson in the queue. The only other name I would throw out is Romeo Doubs at this point. Still very high on him, but I'm very comfortable with just taking the Garrett Wilson play as the sort of superstar in the making and hoping that the Jets offense can support that. Dobbs has continued to look good, but from a pure talent perspective and comfortableness in the NFL level right away perspective, I don't think he's looked as good as Wilson has now. His situation is significantly better, right? I mean,
Well, it is, unless the Packers are going to go down and with the game on the line, try and force the ball through like 15 defenders to Allen Lazard, which again, we love Allen Lazard, but that's not the way to play that.
There's no way last week is what they do long term. I mean,
it's not. At the same time, when we're talking about the context, it's like you just get the impression that the Packers could do equally squirrely things, just in a very different squirrely things than what the Jets are likely to do.
Yeah.
I mean, Garrett Wilson looks like a guy who, even after a little bit of dip, when we're talking about week 12, week 13, week 14, and going into the fantasy playoffs, people are talking about him, the way that we were talking about Odell Beckham and Justin Jefferson at that point of their rookie season. Now, I mean, that's obviously the extreme ceiling scenario, but you don't have that as the ceiling scenario for most players.
Yep. Let's switch to the Jaguars really quick, because I see James Robinson as a top player by ADP right now. Some of these drafts, a couple of weeks old. Travis Etienne just went after our pick at 6.9. I actually think he would have been a really interesting selection there in the 6th round. He looked really explosive this past week. I'm seeing that more and more. That's a point that you made right away in the preseason. Couple of long plays in the running game right away on his first couple of snaps. A long play in the passing game. James Robinson really not looking the part. He's all the way down to a 4.1 yards per carry, which is particularly concerning because he has 2 long touchdown runs. Typically, that's going to elevate, obviously, the yards per carry in a smaller sample. He only has 69 carries overall, has a 50-yard TD, has another TD that was not much shorter than that, and has been so ineffective otherwise that his yards per carry overall looks very average. I'm not saying throw those plays out, but at the same time, think about context and the way averages work. His 4.1 looks pretty bad with those long runs that I think I've already noted. I thought he looked kind of slow on. ETN, 4.9 yards per carry. He's been more efficient in the passing game, more explosive. Looks like he might be the guy going forward. We're almost up here, Sean, but I'll be curious for your Jaguars thoughts after our next pick. We're a pick away. You have a bunch of tight ends in there behind Jerry Jeudy, and I do really like Jeudy at this spot, and he did make it to us. I mean, Jeudy looks like a guy who's bound for some regression. Missed a lot of opportunities. You and I talked about this, not on the air, but we decided to play Jeudy last week, and it didn't go particularly well, but a lot of near misses for him. A near miss where he needed to try a little bit harder in the back of the end zone early. A near miss where he was wide open on a wheel route and Russell Wilson overthrew him a little later that he was wide open on. And then another one where he was just wide open running a crossing pattern I sent a tweet about it and wrote about it in Stealing Signals and made a big deal about it because there was just such an area for Russell Wilson to throw to. And for some reason, he led Jeudy back up the field into the only defender that could have gotten in the play, who Jeudy had 10 yards of separation on. And then that guy becomes a factor at the catch point because of a throw that's just so far away from where it needs to be. Russell Wilson looks terrible. We know that. We've talked about that. And yet, when you're getting those 3 opportunities in one game and none of them go your way, got to feel like at least 1 or 2 of that type of play is going to go Jeudy's way most of the time, even if Wilson doesn't improve, dramatically.
With even decent quarterback play last week, he would have been at about 120-2. And you continue to have to sort of make this bet that Russell Wilson can't stay this bad. Now, that doesn't mean you're making a bet that he's going to come back and be what people thought he was going to be going into the season. It's just a bet that he can't remain one of the worst quarterbacks in the NFL. As you're watching that game and he gets dinged up a little bit, I mean, you're obviously rooting for him to stay healthy, but the immediate thing that you're thinking watching that is that if he goes to the sidelines for a couple of possessions, it would really help the Denver Broncos offense. I mean, that's an impossible thing to think and say about Russell Wilson, but that's where they were. He's not going to be that bad. Jerry Jeudy and Wilson have been a bad fit so far because Jeudy has not been very physical at the catch point. That's sort of a continuing frustration with him, but he is wide open constantly. And for Russell Wilson to not hit him has been bizarre. I mean, Jeudy needs to play a little bit better. Wilson needs to play a lot better. This offense is going to bounce back. Cortland Sutton's still scoring some points in it. I still wouldn't be surprised if Jeudy ends up outscoring Sutton on the season if he can just force himself to try a little bit when the ball is in his hands. So we'll see if those elements come together. Certainly at that price, you like the bounce back thesis. I had that as a very flat range other than Jeudy there. So I like to get him. We drafted DJ Moore in the last draft. We considered Brandon Ayuk. They're both on the board as we come to pick 8. Running back does not look good. You mentioned James Robinson. He's cratering after what happened in week 5. There are some interesting names here like Brian Robinson and Rashad White, but they're probably picks for much later. Once you get information about how the season's actually going to go and you don't feel like you have nearly as many of these contingency-based plays or you're not seeing the positive scenario for as many players, it's kind of fun and interesting to get here into round 8 and be like, I just don't want anybody.
I mean, I there's a few that I like here. I think it's really interesting. Taysom Hill went over Darren Waller just now. I know Waller's banged up, but that's surprising. You have some tight ends in the queue. You also have DJ Moore and Brandon Ayuk in the queue. We could take either of them or any of these tight ends. We're going to go DJ Moore again. We went more over Ayuk last time. I was going to let you take Ayuk this time around, but Ayuk goes 1 pick behind Moore. We're just doubling down on DJ Moore. 8th round DJ Moore. I mean, come on.
You say that, but like DJ Moore is a straight bench on all of our teams. Now, granted, we do have 7 or 8 good receivers on most of
He's
them.
Not going to be for long.
He's coming. He's coming is what you're saying.
Coming.
Ben, Jacoby Myers still available.
Yeah, he's a good pick here. David Njoku, still sitting around in the 8th round, is a guy that we talked very favorably about a couple of weeks ago. After the Thursday night game, you were saying he was the guy that, with the way Cleveland played, was the one that you were concerned about potentially being a big factor. He's continued to draw volume. We have Gerald Everett, Pat Fryermuth in the queue. You have Hayden Hurst in the queue. I think that's too optimistic on Hayden Hurst for me.
Well, I basically, after we missed Pitts, we were hoping to get just more Pitts. You can never have too much of a player that you were completely wrong on.
Yeah, DJ Moore. DJ Moore.
But so I put a handful of tight ends in there. Yes, Hurst will be for much later. Then over the last 3 weeks, if I'm remembering my notes correctly from the Dynasty RB article, Leonard Fournette scoring 17 points per game purely as a receiver. And yet one of the things that has also happened in the last couple is that Rashad White has also put up some points. He was one of our favorites. He's one of the absolute favorites by a country mile for someone we have a lot of respect and enjoyment for in Patrick Kerrane. He's somebody I wouldn't mind getting on this roster if he can stick around a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, he's pretty clearly the top handcuff in all of fantasy right now. If something were to happen to Fournette, White has very clearly become the number 2 in this offense, and no one else is playing, and he's now mixing in the normal run of play. He had a better game in week 4 than in week 5, but he actually went up a little bit in snaps in week 5. I mean, he looks better than Fournette. We already talked about that, but just distancing himself from any other back on the roster is huge. He does go 2 picks before us just now. Jacoby Myers went. We're seeing a lot of the guys that we want to draft go. It feels like a tight end pick, Sean. We got Everett at ADP at 103. We have Firemouth 13 picks ahead of ADP if we wanted to take him. The receivers you've added are a little bit lower ADPs, and we've already taken 6, and we have no tight ends.
Are you still high on Everett? He looked bad this last
not super
week.
high.
I think that he will fall. This might be a fun spot to get a little bit more Jameson Williams. Jahan Dotson playing well, but is out for this week.
Oh, we're going to time out, so we're going to get Gerald Everett.
Everett's the guy we wanted. He has been fantastic so far, skipping the week.
Filibustered yourself on that one.
Well, I forgot that I didn't have the queue set. That is true. We had all the guys in the queue. You don't have an unlimited amount of time. We do get a tight end there.
I think you made a good point on Everett, but your point just carried on too long with Dotson and everyone else. We get Everett. I mean, he didn't play particularly well in week 5. Mike Williams had 10 catches, first time in his career. A lot of the ways they used Mike Williams was like a tight end. They used him on little sprint out and short passes. I think those targets basically came directly from Everett. It was great to see for Mike Williams' profile. I wrote about this in Stealing Signals. His ADOT has come down a little bit. He's getting those shorter area targets. This is something we talked about with Mike Williams last year that was so encouraging early. Through the first, I think it was 3 weeks, he looked like the player from pre-2021, had a high ADOT, lower targets per route run than you'd like to see for a receiver that was drafted as high as he was. These last 2 weeks, week 4 and 5, that ADOT's come down. He started to see some more of those easy short area targets. That's been fantastic for his overall profile because we know he's going to get the downfield looks. He's going to get the end zone shots. Going to have that sort of Gabe Davis element of the high value targets. Want him to see more in the shallow area as well for him to have big upside. Week 5, very exciting for him to get the first career 10 catch game and get a lot of that work. Directly, in my estimation, a negative for Gerald Everett because I feel like those are routes that the tight end is usually running on a lot of these like play action rollouts where it's basically that flip forward where the quarterback's moving left to right, the receiver's moving left to right about a yard or two downfield. They had Evans running on those drag routes. Mike Williams running on those drag routes a few different times this week. I guess I feel like that's not a lock to stick. He's not going to have, Mike Williams is not going to have 10 catches every single week. Obviously, Keenan Allen should be back at some point too, but Everett was still out there a lot. So maybe I'm thinking
it's not a lock to stick, but at the same time, it is a huge red flag because you're watching them play and you're thinking, was that Everett? No, it's Williams.
It's Williams.
I mean, they look very similar, right? They bring similar things, except Williams is the better player. And once Keenan Allen can come back and take, some of the overall targets, and then you're looking at, well, how can they get Williams the ball and balance some of those things out? Once you have success with something there, then you don't necessarily need to go back to Everett, who continues to make just those small handful of mistakes that a tight end of his talent level just can't afford if he's going to maintain the volume. Now, he's going to bounce back with some good games. You have Justin Herbert. You want to bet on that offense, but there are some concerns. You mentioned the positives for Mike Williams. Again, this is something that kind of goes back to our discussion about Elijah Moore in the last draft, where you actually don't want to have these extremely high ADOTs because it's an indication that you've lost the underneath routes that fill out your profile so nicely. When Stephon Diggs was able to add some of those back in, it really allowed him to blow up as a receiver. And so it's easy to think about air yards and target depth incorrectly and forget that you want those things to fill out the profile. So Rondale Moore, Jahan Dotson. Who do you?
I feel like Firemouth is the last of a tier tight ends, and get another tight end here.
Okay.
What do you think?
So we'll take Firemouth. He does look like he may be very iffy for this week, but as the Steelers rise with Kenny
he's going to be
Pickett,
good.
Yeah, he's going to be good. And in a half PPR format here, even if you're selling the offense in comparison to some past seasons, Firemouth somebody I really like from a touchdown perspective.
Yep.
In half PPR.
And you have to like how good he's been on a per route basis at earning volume so far. A lot of good elements. Obviously, with Pickens coming on a little bit, he might not be as good. If Pickett really does unlock the offense and get the ball downfield more and get Pickens going and all of those things, that might not actually be great for Firemouth. Some of what he did over the first few weeks might have been in relation to Trubisky not pushing the ball down the field. But still really like him at a 10th round price. Now we have the Everett Firemouth combo, not necessarily as shiny of a combo as we felt like in pre-draft season, but still two tight ends that we think have a shot to be important pieces in the, later tight end discussion. There are so
Everett
few...
only seems less shiny because he's coming off of a bad week. I mean, he's really hit on his preseason thesis, and one bad week isn't everything. Now, it's the bad weeks are a much bigger problem for players who aren't as well established, and so you have that issue for any guys who aren't clear-cut studs. But the Chargers offense is going to balance some of that out. I think we have to be excited about them. We have that combo on a number of our teams. That's one of the very positive things so far. And I think that offenses that can support tight ends, you're looking at that. Again, if you missed us talking about the Steelers and our enthusiasm for what they're going to do rest of season, make sure you check out the previous episode. Dotson and Rondale Moore still there as we move into round 11.
What's your case for Dotson? Because he hasn't earned volume particularly well. He has scored some TDs. He's made some plays. But I felt like over the weeks that, McLaurin and Seymour sort of started to distance even before Dotson got injured.
Well, he goes. So we'll circle back around to him. If Rondale Moore goes in the next 3 picks, Tyler Alishier, Eno Benjamin, interesting 0 RB candidates who now appear to be in a better situation. Alishier hasn't exactly flashed in his opportunities so far, but when you watch those games, he looks very, very dynamic. For someone who didn't test particularly well, he had great breakaway rush scores. As a prospect, he's that big back who can do it all. He could be someone who really emerges in the second half. The listeners are probably familiar with his profile, but I think the Cardinals are going to score a ton of points. That backfield probably not getting as much attention as it deserves. I could easily see a case for him to already be gone. Those 3 guys are all there. Do you have a preference?
If you want to go with another receiver here, Rondale, I think structurally maybe the third running back makes more sense, but I think my preference is Rondale from a player perspective.
So we go there, and we'll hope that one of the 2 guys comes back in round 12.
Yeah, that makes sense. What about quarterback? You haven't looked over there, but we don't have any yet. Do we have? Tua would have been an interesting pick there.
Yeah, we actually took quarterbacks completely off of the board because there was a long flat spot. Russell Wilson, interesting to go with Jerry Jeudy. Matthew Stafford, someone who's being cut in some leagues. We obviously were looking at Pickett as a possibility for us. Daniel Jones is bringing some rush to the table. We didn't select Tua in the last draft because of the injury and the situation. He does go. Ben, the game maybe I really want to get your feelings on for the listeners. So much enthusiasm about the Jacksonville Jaguars passing game through the first month. Then they go and have, when we talk about full-blown debacles, maybe nothing compares to what Jacksonville did against the Houston Texans last week. And that puts a big hole in Trevor Lawrence's redraft and dynasty profile, especially when you're thinking of Superflex.
I don't think I'm going that far in terms of full-blown debacle. Losing to the Texans is bad on its face, and scoring 6 points against Houston is bad on its face. but they moved the ball pretty well. He had a really bad interception in the end zone. But they had 422 yards of offense in this game. They had a couple turnovers on downs. I think they had 3 possessions end on downs. He ends up throwing 2 interceptions, throws another one late in the game. Yeah, I mean, they shouldn't have lost this game, but I guess I wasn't as discouraged as I felt like most people were, and I was hearing, a lot of the reactions. It sounds like you were too. Most of their drives, they moved the ball. And I just pulled up the drive chart. They had a 3-and-out to start. 54 yards, 60 yards, 55, 51, 68, 53. On their next 6 drives, 50-plus yards on every drive. And they got 6 points because they had 2 turnovers on downs and an interception. Then they had another 3-and-out, a 36-yard drive that ended on downs, and a 34-yard drive to end the game. But 34-plus yards on 8 of their 10 drives. 2 3-and-outs. For the most part, they actually moved the ball a little bit. Some of that was ETN making some big plays and things like that. Obviously, Lawrence did struggle. The completion rate was down. I thought he was fine, though. I mean, I'm still pretty in on him. He's still here, way behind ADP. I think he would be my pick here. What do you think?
They have the 4th best remaining schedule. Specifically for the quarterback position, you pull up the strength of schedule streamer at RotoViz. The concern for me is that Christian Kirk has disappeared over the last couple of weeks, and we're back to the situation where Lawrence has some glaring strengths, but also some glaring deficiencies, and they don't have the surrounding cast that elevates him. When Marvin Jones is the guy who's doing the heavy lifting for you in week 5, it's easy to see how you are having trouble finishing drives. The thing that they need to do, and you mentioned ETN early in the show, and he was the fun part of watching that game. Him breaking big plays was really the only thing going right for them on offense. You can see how that would evolve into a multifaceted attack with competent head coaching, with still a quarterback who's probably on the way to solidifying a minor breakout as they add more talent in the future. As we're looking at the second half of this season, I think that you have to have some concerns. It would be great if they would run him a little bit more. He has the upside to have a few of those read option plays where he adds 25 yards to the line as a rusher. That extra 2.5 points is helpful. I do like having him here very late. It's a fun mix, especially if we're able to get Pickett or somebody like that. I mean, I know listeners don't want to hear this, but I was very excited about how Justin Fields looked last week. We could mix him in with Trevor Lawrence. So some fun directions potentially to go with the late QBs. I definitely agree with what you're saying. One of the things that we saw with the Detroit Lions is the reason they get shut out. And getting shut out by the Patriots is not as bad as scoring 6 points against the Texans, but just continually turn the ball over on downs. At the same time, your team does have to execute some of those plays. You're playing the Texans. You got to score more than 6 points. I think that watching this game, it was so reminiscent of how Lawrence looked as a rookie, where you just don't get any sense that he's going to be the guy who will elevate the receivers, that he's going to make a lot of these wow throws that we're so used to seeing from young guys like Mahomes and Allen and Herbert. And then traditionally we've gotten from players like Aaron Rodgers. If you're going to be surrounded by Christian Kirk, Zay Jones, Marvin Jones, you're going to have to be able to make some of those plays. Your offense is going to have days like this.
Absolutely. We are back on deck. Algier still all the way back around. I forgot that you had said we were hoping to see one of those other running backs come back. Eno was there when we took Lawrence. He ends up going. But Algier, the top player by ADP, you're in on his profile going forward. I thought his usage was nice this week. His production did not follow, but he ran routes and he had a nice little screenplay that got called back to an ineligible downfield 17-yard gain, wiped off on a catch. Ran plenty of routes. Obviously, they don't throw a ton.
Of all the things for the officials to have as a point of emphasis, the illegal man downfield has been a real disappointment for folks watching
Several
their fantasy players.
That's been going on for
points.
years. And no one cares. We don't care if they're downfield. Just let them go downfield.
It's we want to see points. Let the blockers block. Let the defense deal with that. No, I like Alishier a lot. These other guys are going to come back on this offense probably, but he's got a shot to really nail some things down. He's a breakout player. I think even when you're doing a second half draft like this, I mean, you're still looking for breakout players. He's in a better situation now and is a good fit with Saquon Barkley and Breece Hall as our first 2 running backs. Gives us that upside to go with the players who we expect to be in the starting lineup most of the time.
Yeah, I like that. Pickett now, the highest player by ADP, is on the board still, well behind his ADP. Nobody else likes him like we do. Be nice to get him if that opportunity presented, because all we have is Lawrence. We're probably on a 3 QB build here. We have 1 quarterback, Trevor Lawrence, 3 running backs, Barkley, Hall, and Alishier, 7 receivers. So we feel good about 2 tight ends and Everett and Firemouth that can probably keep us to a 2 tight end build. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 picks left. Got to get at least probably 2 more running backs and 2 more QBs in these 5 picks. Is that how you're thinking?
That would be the plan if we get those options. You can go down to 4 running backs if you get 3 elite early. We just select 2. I mean, you can always do whatever you want and gamble on those other players.
Probably 6 running backs in this build. Are we done with receivers, you think?
I think unless someone really jumps out.
Yeah.
We have here, for anybody trying to keep track, CeeDee Lamb, Gabe Davis, Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, Jerry Jeudy, DJ Moore, Rondale Moore. Again, loading up on some of the Moores. We've got a good mix of ceiling, of weekly ceiling, of overall floor, of bounce back candidates, of breakout candidates. You can always add more firepower at wide receiver, especially in half PPR. You do need to score some touchdowns to really get in the scoring column. But if we ended up sticking at that, it would also be okay.
It would. Let's check out the running backs here on the ADP list. We just saw Chase Edmonds go.
I was hoping he would come back to us. James Cook, yeah.
James Cook looks like a really nice one in this spot. Looked explosive. I think he's going to continue to work into more work. He goes 1 pick ahead of us. So Kenny Pickett made it all the way back to us, pick 162, ADP of 145. And that ADP is probably mostly just driven over the last week or so since he, got named the starter. Pretty interesting to see him fall this far. I really like the pick. We obviously have Firemouth on the roster as well. We took him in the last draft as well, but now we get our second QB, Trevor Lawrence and Kenny Pickett. We got to make some late running back selections, though, that flip some things. Ooh, Samaje Perine still sitting there a little bit later. I think you still got to like him.
Every time they put Samaje Perine in, I think, the Bengals could actually get some running back yardage on this play. It was disappointing to see Cook go. We have a lot of exposure to Devin Singletary. That's more or less playing out to plan at this juncture, and yet the young guy looks good. And the only reason that we were on the veteran is because the veteran tends to be consistently undervalued, and the prices actually encourage you to take the veteran. But as the season goes along, the young guy's going to get more and more. The most bizarre thing here is that Zach Moss still plays occasionally. That has to go down to 0 to maximize what the Bills can do. I like what I've seen from Cook. He's made some mistakes that you can understand why his snap share has stayed where it is, but he's another guy where a couple of big plays and suddenly this backfield could belong to him. It's not a backfield that creates an absolute ton of fantasy points, but the reason that so many people were on him, besides just it being the shiny new thing, is that his specific profile is maybe the one profile that does make sense for or within the Buffalo Bills offense. Yeah, that's too bad he didn't come back to us. That would have been a great pick.
Agreed. Yeah, he's been making strides. Moss still played over him this week. That TD was sort of in garbage time, but he looks good, and I think that's the important point to be factoring in right now. I like the Zamir White ad there, too, to the queue. With the way Josh Jacobs is being used, they've been willing to use a one-back heavy. Zamir White becomes a pretty interesting handcuff now, I think. Don't think he would necessarily get as big of a role if something were to happen to Jacobs, but I think he'd probably be the pretty clear fill in for that role. That's been very valuable for Jacobs so far. I'm comfortable with Gainwell as well. If you're avoiding him because of my disinterest in the Eagles backs generally, but at this price in the 15th round, I think you can take a stab at Gainwell. J.D. McKissick. I mean, I would consider it. He's running enough routes. We are back on the clock. What are you thinking?
Gainwell would probably be my preference if you're comfortable with that one. Every week gives you new opportunities to be really excited and new opportunities to be frustrated. I have an absolute ton of Devontae Smith, and so it wasn't as big of an issue as if you have a ton of AJ Brown. But you had mentioned in your notes to me that, if you're the better team, why are you trying to shorten the game? The last thing you want is a game with the Arizona Cardinals to come down to just a couple of possessions with the game virtually tied. Why are you trying to run out the entire fourth quarter? Why are you going exclusively to the run? Why are you taking that field goal? If Kyler Murray doesn't commit a gaffe, and because of all of the emphasis paid to what happened with him in the offseason and the contract notes, him not being allowed to watch TV, you end up thinking in terms of this being sort of a boneheaded play that fits within that. But the main thing is that Murray thought he was just a little bit further and got unlucky with that spike at the end. If that doesn't happen, the Cardinals are going to win that game. And so I'm very frustrated to see a team that's been as dynamic as the Eagles make that weird decision to have I believe a 17-play field goal drive where 14 plays were runs and 0 of the 3 passes were to wide receivers.
But they didn't feel good about their offensive line situation. Bill Barnwell and I were chatting a little bit this week, and he brought up the good notes on that. I was kind of talking similarly, but he brought up some good notes on Jordan Mailata being out.
But you still don't think that's an excuse?
I think it's a viable reason for why their ADOT was way down. It was a short passing game. I don't understand not using AJ Brown in any context. All of a sudden, if you're going to go to a short passing game, all of a sudden Devonta Smith's ADOT drops a ton, and he has like a 3 ADOT but catches all these passes. Why is Devonta Smith your yak guy?
He's the 1A. He's the 1A there, Ben.
I would be throwing every one of those passes to AJ Brown and letting him break some tackles. I think all of our listeners agree. Rather than, Devonta Smith, who is good, but my God, he's not a big man.
I know you want to see more plays just to Miles Sanders. That's how you drew the offense up in the offseason. We are coming back here in round 16. Zamir White is still available. I think it's a cool note. You explain kind of how you were thinking about that situation, and it mirrors mine almost identically. It's a great illustration of contingency-based drafting and the cool way that zero RB works, where Josh Jacobs has had his value skyrocket based on his play. He's got the best peripherals in the game right now. His EP profile is great. He's outperforming that by a little bit, but that also actually means that Zamir White's contingency-based upside is greater for the reasons that you mentioned. Both of these guys can actually rise, even though White hasn't scored any points so far.
Yep. Pretty easy logic there, I think. The same thing fits with Rashad White. Samaje Perine still on the board. Zamir White still on the board. We're here in the 16th round. We're about to run out of time. Got to pick one of them. There it is. Zamir White locks in maybe a little bit more explosiveness in a contingency scenario than Samaje Perine. Still really like Perine, but I think I agree with that decision based on what we've seen from the Raiders so far. I think most of what Jacobs has done so far, pretty believable. If he just continues to stay healthy, have been pretty excited about him instilling signals throughout the year. Talked about that a little bit this week. Talked positively about him after week 1 and week 2. And again, after last week's big game, after week 4's big game, and then he had another big one here in week 5. At the same time, we were not on him in the offseason, so in no way does that mean that I'm saying that we didn't miss by not having him. He looks like a great zero RB back. He was so cheap and went in a range in a lot of drafts where just really perfect for the zero RB build if you were taking him in the 8th round.
So Josh Jacobs, one of the biggest risers in my updated dynasty rankings today. Also, someone who you just have to give so much respect and have enthusiasm for what he's done. 2020 and 2021 doesn't quite average 4 yards per carry. His career to this point, he was below 0 in terms of fantasy points over expectation. He looks absolutely fantastic. Looks like the former first-round pick that he is and has been the perfect fit in this new Josh McDaniels offense. As we head to round 17, P. Ryan's still there. We talked about getting a third QB, and one of our favorites is Sam Howell. Justin Fields did eventually go. I don't know if you would have been on board with taking him. They did some cool things offensively. I think that the second half of the season is going to be better. It's probably not going to be great still.
There's something with the Bears offense that you're going to classify as cool.
They really dominated the Vikings in the second half of that game. We'll go that route.
The Vikings can be so bad sometimes. They still only threw 20-something passes. I mean, Fields runs enough, but you're basically just drafting a running back.
Anything over 12 passes, I'm going to give the Chicago Bears credit for. We're on the clock here. P. Ryan is still there. You had mentioned sticking at wide receiver and tight end, but Dulcich and Tyquan Thornton, I think, are pretty interesting plays. We only have 2 more picks. We have 4 positions. How do you want to use them?
I think it's P. Ryan and Howell from a structural perspective, but I mean, Dulcich and Thornton are fun too. We do take P. Ryan there to give us a 6th running back. I think with the 2 studs that we have, but mostly all kind of contingency-based plays after that. So we have Barkley, Hall, Algier, Gainwell, Zamir White. I think it makes sense to get a 6th running back there. Samaje Perine, one that we like as a contingency play, very clearly the number 2 in Cincinnati right now. I think it was smart to get a 6th running back there since we had a guy that makes sense to fit that build. Could have went with 5 running backs if, Perine wasn't there. But I don't understand why Perine's going in the 17th round in these drafts. I mean, everything for him so far has been what you would want to have seen. He should be like a 14th, 13th, 12th round pick. And look at the way that Mixon's volume has manifested in the green zone, and he hasn't been very efficient with it. Everything we said about Josh Jacobs, Zamir White, all these scenarios with a star back getting all the work is also pretty good for the number 2. All that relates to Samaje Perine as well.
And there is an element where when you haven't seen it with the back yet, the player just ends up being a lot less expensive. But the gap in price between someone, let's say, Alexander Madison and Samaje Perine probably shouldn't be there, except for the fact that Cook has that chronic shoulder injury. If the starter has some kind of chronic issue that is very likely to pop back up, the handcuff obviously is going to be more expensive. But purely from a future workload perspective, I mean, P. Ryan right there in terms of both how the Bengals use the running back and how we expect the Bengals to score, even though that part of it, again, has been so disappointing this year. Colin Kelly and I labeled the Bengals as the most disappointing team in 2022 on overtime this week, and that's when you have the Falcons as a possibility out there too. Falcons more of a fantasy disappointment than a reality disappointment. They've done some decent things. If all you care about is being 2-3, then the Falcons are accomplishing their objectives.
Yeah. We have we took Howell on our other draft so far. We talked a little bit about the Heineke issue. Mac Jones still there? Is that a guy that you would consider instead? Are there other? I'm okay with Howell again, but I was looking at Jones and saying, well, maybe we should lock in a third pretty clear starter. He's actually apparently potentially going to play this week.
Mac Jones, one of my favorites. I think that he is someone you want to target in dynasty trades in almost every format. Get him onto your roster. This Patriots offense has been better than expected. They're going to continue to develop. They may not even stay with exactly the same principles that they have now. They may not stay with the same coaching long term. He looks good. Jacoby Myers looks fantastic. Ramondre Stevenson, someone we paid
so
a high
good to
price
hear you
for
say that.
in the previous. I mean, I've come full circle on Jacoby Myers. He's one of my favorites now. He looks great. The peripheral pieces in terms of Kendrick Bourne and Nelson Aguilar, we know that they can do some things. They have Devontae Parker there, but Tyquan Thornton is back. He played this week. He's going to be somebody who makes an impact down the stretch. I have him in the queue. I wouldn't mind Him as an 18th round pick, he actually goes a couple of picks there later. He's the 18th.
Yeah. So Dulcich went before us. I was going to ask you to elaborate on Thornton, who got his debut, played a little bit more in the second half of what was sort of a blowout. Devontae Parker's snaps were way down and routes were way down. I didn't see anything on an injury. I wonder if that was just because of the blowout a little bit and wanting to get Thornton some more run. But it seemed like Thornton was, if you're just looking at the routes, Thornton was taking pretty directly from Parker. Kind of confusing because Nelson Aguilar also picked up an injury really early and went out. But the way I was reading that is despite Aguilar getting hurt and going out early, Parker's routes came down quite a bit as well. Kendrick Bourne is the one who's been a part of the offense throughout, whose routes went way up and kind of took the Aguilar role, I guess, is the way that I was reading that. And yet, and I guess more Thornton's playing time came from Parker. Again, just sort of reading tea leaves a little bit. It is confusing to see Parker not play as much as Myers, as much as even Kendrick Bourne in a game where Aguilar does go out. And so Thornton being back was, really the only explanation for that. Very optimistic about his usage for his first game back. You've been very high on Thornton. He got to roughly half the dropbacks as routes. What are your thoughts on him going forward?
That's much higher than I would have expected in this game. Just a fantastic development for him. And this offense is going to be more aggressive. This is a team that when you talk about teams that were 1-3, they didn't get anywhere close to losing to the Lions, obviously, but you're in position to fall to 1-4. The New England Patriots probably still a top 10 team in the NFL. They're going to get Mac Jones back. You look at the receiver situation, and when Jacoby Myers is out there doing what he can do, then Devontae Parker doesn't really have much additional to add in this offense. I think that we're going to see them want to unlock Tyquan Thornton, see if he can be a vertical guy for them, see if he can add more than that. One of the things that was a big part of the discussion with him before he breaks his collarbone is that he had impressed as more than a vertical receiver in training camp. And you don't want to get too much into this, especially with a team like the Patriots, where we know that their number one thing is just to win. They're not worried about proving themselves to other people. They're not worried about keeping, draft picks happy, anything like that. But this is a situation where they select Tyquan Thornton ahead of George Pickens. You go and look either of those guys up on the internet, and the talk is going to be, how did the Patriots miss again? George Pickens already a superstar. He's picked in that same range ahead of Alec Pierce and Sky Moore. I mean, they need to show that they can draft receiver, and just also you want to get the value out of your guys. You want to have an explosive offense. And I think they're excited about Thornton. They're not coming back out and saying, oh, we missed again. There is optimism and enthusiasm here, which is demonstrated by how much he plays in this first game. Maybe it will turn out that I'm too high on Mac Jones. I mean, the reason why we'd be looking at Sam Howell instead of Mac Jones there in the 17th round, 18th round, is simply that Howell has a dream profile for fantasy, and he's probably going to be surrounded by pretty good weapons. You mentioned that Jahan Dotson hasn't been drawing all of the targets, but he's dealt with some minor little injuries in the games. He's been a touchdown scoring machine. I guess I wouldn't be worried about the target per route element early on with him when he's demonstrating so many other things. And he has guys to play off of, to where you going to have to deal with Terry McLaurin. You're going to have to deal a little bit with Curtis Samuel. There are three very discrete things that those three guys do. You're not having to worry about overlap there. And the Washington Commanders, you would expect to face a lot of garbage time the rest of the way, regardless of what they do at the quarterback position. So Howell, one of these players who could be a game breaker, even if he's a poor reality player in the early going. I mean, he's got to play well enough, not just get quickly benched again. But that would be the element that you would consider him, because fantasy and reality don't directly overlap in some of these ways. But Mac Jones, someone who looked good last year, he was feisty early when they were struggling. He's got, even though he doesn't have the strongest arm, he can throw the vertical passes. I've never been, I mean, just like most people, I wasn't a New England Patriots fan with Tom Brady, but it's almost a way to root against Tom Brady to be on some of these Patriots guys now in a weird way. I think this is a fun team, and that it's such a quality organization. I like to make some of these bets. I think that Jacoby Myers and Ramondre Stevenson, Tyquan Thornton, Mac Jones, Bill Belichick is fired up to bounce back this season. And it's going to be fun now because for so much of their run, they were awesome. You got the best coach, you got the best quarterback, but you also have a very weak division. And that does matter when you're talking about how do you get the number one seed? How do you get buys in the playoffs? How do you get an easy route to the Super Bowl? They're now in a division that has the Buffalo Bills number one, but also we're seeing the Miami Dolphins make strides with their new coaching staff, Tua, Tyreek Hill. Without the injuries there, Miami Dolphins, they would be the talk of the 2022 NFL season. And then you go to the Jets and they've got Breece Hall and they've got Garrett Wilson and they win this game against the Dolphins. This is a fun one. The AFC East has suddenly become maybe the best storyline in the NFL. I can't wait to see how it plays out.
Well, it's funny. I think you can make a similar case about the NFC East, which is another division that we did not expect to be particularly deep, but the Eagles have been so good. The Cowboys defense looks so good that they're 4-1, right? Even despite being particularly great on offense right now. And the Giants are like sort of surprising where Brian Daboll's got some stuff working, even though it's not the way we love to see for fantasy necessarily, but winning games, upsetting the Packers this week. I don't know that they're going to necessarily keep that running. Washington a little further behind, but if they do play Howell, you were talking about him so optimistically. I mean, I just really want to see Sam Howell play at this point, but I'm just a little bit concerned that they're going to go to Heineke when they do inevitably bench Wentz, and they will. If anyone's confused or concerned about the Wentz situation, there is a contingency in their trade. If he plays more than 70% of their snaps, the trade, one of the draft picks moves up, I believe, from a third to a second round pick. They're just not going to do that. I mean, the Colts had a similar contingency last year, but they were in playoff position, and they ended up sending a first-round pick to the Eagles because it was a second to a potential first because they let Wentz play through the end of the year, and they didn't even make the playoffs anyway. That was what it was. I don't think Washington has any shot to do that. I think they're already sort of part of why they're already sort of laying the groundwork is they got to bench him. Like that, if he's not playing well, they know they can't give up an extra round of value on their draft pick. And he's not playing well. So we're going to see someone else play quarterback there. You just really want it to be Howell, but the fact that he's not even the game day backup, that was one of the things I was excited about with Pickett. Mason Rudolph was the inactive for week one right away. So that was exciting for Pickett.
And
not ideal.
It rubbed some people the wrong way. Mason Rudolph did not like being the game day inactive. And so you're getting some signal from that.
Right. We are not getting the same type of signal quite yet from Washington. Hopefully we see that. Maybe if Heineke plays a couple of games, doesn't play well, we'll get a third quarterback and get some Howell late in the year. It would be best if they just went straight to Howell, obviously. They know what they have in Heineke, but they also seem to like what they have in Heineke. So our final draft was Saquon Barkley, Breece Hall, 2 running backs in the first 2 rounds, and then CeeDee Lamb, Gabe Davis, Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, Jerry Jeudy, DJ Moore, Gerald Everett, Pat Freiermuth, hit 2 tight ends sort of in the window. It's a little different structurally, obviously, in season. Rondale Moore, Trevor Lawrence, Tyler Algier, Kenny Pickett, Kenneth Gainwell, Zamir White, Samaje Perine, and Mac Jones. 3 quarterback build. Again, more of a traditional sort of double anchor running back build where we hit a lot of receivers after that. It's a fun team, a lot of depth at receiver. Are you concerned about the tight ends, Everett and Firemouth, or how do you feel about that?
It's, I think, decent prices coming off of a bad week for both of those guys. We can see them play well within the context of the overall scoring environment that we expect there. It would have been a lot more fun to get a round 6 Kyle Pitts, but he does go 3 picks ahead of us. We take Jerry Jeudy in round 7. TJ Hawkinson goes 1 pick after that. A very Jekyll and Hyde performance from him over the last couple of weeks. After Freiermuth is gone, though, it does get pretty bleak. You had mentioned you didn't want any part of Hayden Hurst, but he goes in the 10th round. Dalton Schultz is both injured and not scoring any points. He's in that round as well. You could say the same thing about Dawson Knox in 11. If we don't make those picks there, then you're really almost kind of pushing yourself into the Daniel Bellinger, Greg Dulcich kind of dynamic in order to get good contingency-based plays where you're going to get production relative to costs that you like. We really hit the end of a tier, and anytime that you can hit the end of a tier, that part of it has to make you happy.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that. Well said. Obviously, there's a little bit more depth. We talk about this every year at tight end in draft season because some of them are upside profiles, but we do expect a lot of them to not hit because some teams deprioritize the position. Some of the guys are not being played. You didn't even mention Trey McBride there. We can't figure out why he's not being played, but he's not being played. And it is tough for rookie tight ends to be productive. And he's looking like he's on a trajectory where he's not going to be because he's not really even seeing the field yet. The later rounds at tight end in an in-season draft is not an area that I necessarily want to be. And that's part of why I was really interested actually in Mark Andrews right away in the first round, because I think the elite tight end thing is even more important right now in season. If you can go trade for a guy like Mark Andrews, I mean, you almost have to, like whatever you can give up to make that happen. If we haven't seen it yet with tight ends, I mean, it's tough. There's going to be potentially some fill-ins and things like that. There are the profiles that we still like Kyle Pitts, and he's a really interesting one to be targeting still in the middle rounds. But overall, the position not deep in season, and we know that, and we've seen that with the scoring. So definitely something to keep in mind.
If we take Mark Andrews in the first, then we lose Saquon Barkley, and that would create an interesting sort of cascade of decisions. DeAndre Swift goes 302, and so probably the best running back you're looking at in round 3 there would be Alvin Kamara. You could right away go to Ramondre Stevenson. He goes after our pick in the 4th, where we took Gabe Davis. Kenneth Walker doesn't come back to us in the 5th. He would also be an interesting pick in the 4th round. And then the player that you had mentioned of Travis Etienne, probably the guy we should have gone with in round 6, even though we did have Barkley early. If we hadn't taken Barkley and had taken Andrews, then Etienne definitely would have been a focal point. Some of those decisions positionally, if you go in a different direction in round 1, pretty interesting.
Yeah, when you broke it down that way, I wasn't really thinking through it, but Barkley, Garrett Wilson in 6, and scroll down a little bit to the tight ends. One of the tight ends in 9 and 10 versus Andrews, Etienne in 6, and one of the receivers maybe in 9 and 10 to continue building depth there. It might have been like a Jameson Williams. It does get pretty thin at receiver. So Garrett Wilson would have been a loss to this build for sure. But there are, I think, arguments on both sides there. I think Andrews, Etienne is pretty fun. Barkley, obviously, I'm not down on. He's a good guy to have at the top, and I think this is definitely a way to build, right? A way to look at your roster. If you're in a format where you took Barkley and Andrews at the 1-2 turn, you're feeling really great right now. Maybe you took Breece Hall at the 3-4 turn. We're sitting here talking about these guys in the first couple of rounds in season. Definitely exciting to see those types of guys gaining value. We were focusing on a lot of guys that have lost value because we were trying to draft some of these bounce back candidates in this format, but really fun to do these drafts in season.
Yeah, I've enjoyed it a lot. It helps you think about where you are on value compared to the field. As we talked about a little bit during the draft, I like the combination of breakout, bounce back, value play, guys that you like, good production, and either scenario there with Barkley or Andrews leads to a fun team, in part because we get to draft guys that we like at later draft slots.
Can I point out a couple other guys we like that I see really interesting as I'm looking around the rest of this draft board? 201, A.J. Brown. 202, Jamar Chase. How are you going to argue with that, Sean?
You can get great prices on Chase right now. Chase, someone you should be buying in every format.
Oh, that 201, I'm seeing now. Jalen Hurts was the pick at 112. Makes a little more sense to be stacking the Eagles at 1 and 2. But yeah, as high as I am on AJ Brown, I'm taking Jamar Chase over AJ Brown, even if I took Hurts.
And it's just, again, a thing that is very human, very understandable with Devontae Adams. But if he doesn't have the incident, then I would think that he has to be at the 1-2 turn instead. Drafters in formats like this have to be concerned about a possible suspension. You can't take a lot of zeros in the compressed format that we have remaining. It's been interesting to watch where, DeAndre Hopkins goes here compared to when drafters had to give up the full 6 games. So Adams, other players with injuries, yeah, you get such a fun mix. T. Higgins, the massive performances outperformed Jamar Chase to an extent, but because of the 0 drops into round 3. If he had come back with another big game, he would be at the 1-2 turn instead. Fantasy football can change very, very quickly. That's why you have to build lineups that are deep and anti-fragile. Ben, this has been so much fun. That'll do it for this episode of Stealing Bananas. I'm Shawn Siegele. You can follow Ben at Yards Per Gretch. Sign up for Stealing Signals. So much of the cool info that Ben is sharing on the show, you get in even so much more depth in the write-ups. Subscribe for Stealing Lines. Win those NFL bets every week. Join us over at RotoViz. 40-plus tools for understanding and managing your lineups. Subscribe to the feed. Leave us a rating and review. Dominate your midseason drafts. Dominate your leagues in week 6. We'll talk to you guys soon.